Hi everybody, it's me, Dr. Kestler from Lorain County Community College with another COVID-video. First of all, let me report my temperature today. It is 35.9 degrees centigrade, which converts to 96.6 Fahrenheit, or fake degrees as I like to call it. What I want to talk about today is testing and how important testing is, especially if we are to, how we emerge out of this whole situation. The British government is committed to large-scale antibody testing, and I want to just go through antibody testing for a second and tell you a little bit how that works. One of the things we need to be certain is that if we do develop an antibody test, it needs to be absolutely 100% devoted to this particular virus and not other coronaviruses which may be found around in circulating around in our world. So one of the viruses that causes a common cold is a coronavirus. So coronaviruses have been around for a long time, and this new one, we need to be able to pick it out of the lineup. And so there is a new test out, and this is a test that has been made by this is by a vendor, and how it works is it's an antibody test. So what I'm going to do today is a little bit of antibody lecture and about telling you how antibodies work. For those of you who don't know, antibodies can be used for both an acute infection on occasion as well as a long-term evidence. A lot of my students get tested for what they call antibody titers to make sure they had their childhood vaccines, and I always tell them also to make sure that their childhood vaccines are still good. There's still something we call memory around. Memory is also something that we use to test. So let me just first of all tell you what an antibody looks like. An antibody has two antigen binding domains. That's the yellow part that says V on top. V is for variable. That is what binds the foreign thing. And it's variable because every antibody has a different antigen binding site. Antigen is the thing that it actually binds to on the cell, on the foreign thing, the virus or the protein or the whatever. And then there's the constant chain. So this particular antibody shown here, which is the receptor, just a little cartoon of the receptor for B cells. This is the guy that would bind, and it has two antigen binding sites. Now, there are more than one antigen binding antibodies. There is IgG, which is the most common antibody, the circulating antibody. It is also the antibody that is associated with memory. It is also the one that crosses the placenta, but that's not of concern here. And then there's the other one I want to talk about is IgM. That's 3 over on this chart. And IgM is what I tell my students is the Jackie Chan of antibodies. It has 10 antigen binding sites, and those 10 antigen binding sites can be very effective at fighting a disease. One of the things that they do is IgM, as you can imagine, as you can see, are first responders. And you really want that to be a first responder. You want an antibody that is a disease-fighting machine to be your first responder. On the next slide, there is a little bit of a picture of how antibodies work. And you'll see there's this period of time before you develop an immune response. That's called the latent period right there on this slide. And then during the first exposure, you can see that IgM is indeed a first responder, and IgG is a secondary responder. That is all different on the second exposure, but we're not talking about that right now. But we will in a minute. But I want to focus on that early and late. So the way that you can use an antibody test is you can actually, they're designing this test to cover two things. Number one, test for IgM, and number two, test for IgG. If you test for IgM, that is what you're going to see in a primary exposure. If the person is infected, you will see IgM at first. And so you can look at somebody who is acutely infected at that point, and you can possibly identify them real close to when they start to show symptoms. IgG is also present in the first response, but it's predominantly IgG that is the memory response. It is the one that is responsible for memory, and it is the one that persists. So if you go looking for IgG to COVID-19, you are looking for either, and you find IgM. IgG plus IgM means that you have an acute infection. And IgG alone means that you're looking at a long-term infection. So this can be really an important tool. But again, one of the things that you have to do is you have to be absolutely certain that you validate your test, that you're certain that you are calling the right people positive and calling the right people negative, and you're actually able to do this kind of a technique. And we hope that we can get this kind of thing rolling pretty soon, because this will help us get back to it. Last thing I want to mention is that for those of you looking for more information, and I think the response to these videos shows that some of you are, I can tell you in Ohio, tune into the governor's daily 2 o'clock press conference. It's very good. And in New York, I understand Governor Cuomo has an excellent review of everything going on there. Today is going to be the first day that we have greater than 500,000 cases in the world at some point today. At some point this week, we will probably overtake Italy and China and be the #1 source of cases in the world. And there is no real sign yet that the cases will decline. So I just want to point that all out to you, that those kinds of things are out there. You can look for more information as we all get through this. And finally, I just want to remind you all to look for the helpers, be the helpers. We are the helpers. And I think that is an important thing that is how we're going to get through this. If we all work with each other, we all help each other, we can make a difference. I'll thank you and say be good to each other, and may you persist like a lentivirus. Thank you, and have a good day.